Okay, so I just did a video where I talked about the best Disney animated classics from each respective decade. So I figured to balance this out, I decided, okay, what are, in my personal opinion, the worst ones? Now, worst doesn't necessarily mean the absolute worst. When I say worst, I mean it could easily be simply by called the weakest. Some of them I actually think are pretty decent till in one couple of extents actually pretty good. So, and not to say that there are some merits to each and one of these, because they are, but I figured, okay, what are, in my opinion, the worst ones from each respective decade? So let's get into this, shall we? Let me just adjust myself here a little bit so that way you guys can see me, that way I can sit comfortable and you guys can have a much more comfortable experience by watching this. So for the worst one from the 1930s, you know, and I mentioned this in my best per decade video, that there were only two Disney animated classics to come out in the 1930s. So worst one has to be Pinocchio. And again, not a bad movie, but out of the two, I mean, this one is still pretty good. I would still consider giving this one a 4-star, maybe 4.5 stars out of 5. But again, compared to the first one, which gave us this whole thing, this one has to be last. Coming out for the 1940s, the worst one for the 1940s. I was flopping around with a couple of different ones, but at the end I would have to say it's Make My Music. I figured this one would be, it's probably the one I find the least memorable. At least some of the other ones like Saludos Amigos or The Three Caballeros, I actually remember segments from them. I still find some memorable moments from them. Make My Music, I don't remember anything aside from solid animation. There's nothing else to really talk about in the world of Disney. If you like it, that's fine. I would love to hear the arguments for it down in the comment section below. Moving into the 1950s, this one was a little bit of a task for me, but at the end of the day, I feel comfortable giving it to this one, which would be Sleeping Beauty. This one is, means not necessarily terrible, but I personally find this one, aside from very good animation, and I really like the fairies, and obviously Maleficent, this one for me, I do not care for Aurora, I do not care for Prince Philip. I find them extremely bland as a couple. I don't like the chemistry. I really don't care much for the story. I find this one just bland and semi-forgettable. I mean, if it weren't for the fairies and for a great villain in this, it would be, I don't know if I would necessarily say at the bottom, but at least out of the ones that came out back in the 1950s, this one for me is the worst one. Moving into the 60s, a little more difficult because there's very few. One is a big personal favorite of mine, which of course would be 101 Dalmatians, and the other one is The Jungle Book, and I call that one the best one out of the 1960s. So by the process of elimination, the worst one has to be The Sword and the Stone. Again, it's okay, it's fine. It does something a little different with the King Arthur legend, and I like it for what it is. I mean, I like the fight between Merlin and Madame Mim. That is pretty cool. And some of the more educational stuff, it's fine. Again, it's just fine. It's not one that I normally go back towards, but if you have a kid that's like between the age of 6 through 10, this one will be entertaining enough for them. But that one for me is easily the worst one out of the ones that came out in the 60s. Moving into the 70s, I've grown up with this one. I watched this one a lot with my grandparents, and I know I have a personal friend of mine named Jessica. She is gonna hate me for saying this, but in my personal opinion, this for me is the worst one to come out of the 1970s, even though I have a childhood attachment to it, but it is the Aristocats. Disney, what's going on here? What were you thinking when you made this? It's just so sugary and cutesy for the sake of being cutesy. Don't get me wrong, I like cats, but man, this is just way too much. It's just all over the place. It has no sense of identity. It doesn't really feel very Disney to me. I mean, some of the music is pretty cool. I like the jazzy parts when it does that, but story-wise, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't give you anything for me to really latch onto. Every single time I would watch this with my sister or my cousins, I was sitting there just like, I want to watch something else, but I guess I'm just stuck with this. So so that one for me, easily bottom of the barrel for the 1970s. Okay, moving into the 80s. Initially, I was thinking maybe going with the Black Cauldron, but then again, I remember how good the animation is, even though I don't like the story. So I kind of couldn't say that one. So at the end of the day, I had to go with Oliver and Company, the animated film from 1988, which is semi-based on the Oliver Twist story. Instead of being set in Victorian England, it's set in 1950s New York, and with animals mostly. It's a little bit confusing to me, in the sense that, yeah, some of the characters are animals, yes, semi-interact with humans. The music, however, is like when you have Billy Joel singing. To me, it sticks out like a sore thumb. It doesn't really work for me in that sense. So stylistically, set in the 50s. I mean, if the song Why Should I Worry was kind of like a 50s rockabilly type of boogie rock song, it would make a little bit stylistically a lot more sense, but it sounds very 80s, and therefore it feels very out of place. But yeah, I don't think this one overall doesn't really work for me, not to mention coming off the heels of The Great Mouse Detective, which I think is very underrated, and not to mention it was released around the same time that Don Bluth gave us stuff like An American Tail and The Land Before Time. Yeah, okay, when Don Bluth does Disney better than Disney, we have a problem here, guys. Okay, moving into the 90s. And once again, it's one I have a personal childhood attachment to. But it's easily the worst one to come out of the 1990s, and it's going to be Pocahontas. Okay, coming off the heels of The Lion King, this is just a mind-boggling thing. And knowing the fact that people actually jumped ship from The Lion King to go and work on this because they thought it was going to be the bigger hit, yeah, okay, you guys missed out. it doesn't really work for me. Once again, the story's pretty bland. It's by that point been really rehashed. I don't really, I find there's a non-existent chemistry between John and Pocahontas herself. The songs, they're fine. Whenever I listen to them, I kind of sort of forget about them. They get kind of lost in the shuffle compared to songs like The Circle of Life or Under the Sea, Kiss the Girl, Beauty and the Beast, Belle. Once again, once you compare it to the other Disney songs, it kind of gets lost in the shuffle. So yeah, I mean, aside from great color work in the animation department, there's nothing really to latch onto with this one. Okay, now moving into the 2000s. I just gotta say this right now, I just don't like this one, and it's easily not just the worst one out of the entire 2000 decade, but it's in my opinion, the worst Disney animated film ever made, and that of course is this one, Chicken Little. This is such a misfire in so many directions. The story is really dumb. The humor is all over the place. The animation is awful. The fact that this, just to keep this in mind, this came out in 2005. 2 years after Finding Nemo and the year after The Incredibles, and somehow the animation looks bad even for 1995. So this doesn't work for me. This is easily the worst one. It's too cruel. It's not very funny. Just a bad idea. So let's just leave it at that. Let it be done. Let us be done with it. Now, worst one out of the 2010s. For me, I know some people like this one. I personally don't get it, but for me, it was kind of a toss-up between two different ones. But at the end of the day, I was hoping for this one to be good, and I was very disappointed in it. And that, of course, is Ralph Breaks the Internet. Or Wreck-It Ralph 2, if you wanted that. The reason why I consider that one to be the worst one, it has a lot to do stylistically from its predecessor. Like Wreck-It Ralph, I think is probably, for me personally, it's the best one out of the 2010s, even though I picked Frozen if you watched the video. The reason why I picked Wreck-It Ralph Wreck-It Ralph 2, Ralph Breaks the Internet, as the worst one, it has to do with, it feels modern in the moment for like 10 seconds and then boop, it's done. And Wreck-It Ralph 1 was kind of set in this very arcade 80s style gaming, whereas this one is about going in on the internet. That to me, okay, let's just put it this way, okay. Wreck-It Ralph 1, it had the retro gaming aspect by being arcade games for the adults. The gaming aspects both kids and adults could relate to. Once they went with the internet, to me, it brought everything down. The quality and the storytelling really took a big hit as a result of this. So I don't find it very funny. I don't find it very interesting. It's not very compelling. I will happily rewatch the Wreck-It Ralph 1 any given day. Ralph Breaks the Internet. I really wish they could have done so much more with a sequel. And for me, I think it's the first sequel they ever did to a Disney animated classic since The Rescuers Down Under, and it's incredibly underwhelming for me. So with that, you have my list, what I consider to be the worst ones. So with that, I'm just gonna head out, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one. So bye guys. I don't know why.